Harrison Ford has stories to tell. Yeah, Indiana Jones is back. But enough with the legend stuff. We spent 2 days in LA with Ford, in his airplane hangar, at his house, drinking bourbon and talking about what really matters in life. This article is by Ryan D'Agostino and it was published on May the 31st, 2023. The last time I spoke with him was on the phone, 3 weeks after we drank bourbon at his house. We sat at the bar in what I'll call the family room, a gleaming wooden bar with the bottles lined up behind, organized in neat rows by type of liquor. We ate Emmentaler cheese that Harrison Ford had sliced in the kitchen with a silver cheese knife and arranged on a plate with a handful of wheat crackers. That was in Los Angeles, where he lives when he's not at his most of the time home, the ranch in Wyoming that he bought in the 80s. He was now in Atlanta. His voice, the unmistakable, rich, low grumble, came through the phone, obscured by some shuffling in the background. "How you doing?" he asked. In movies, Ford's voice can tremble and quiver at low volume, just enough to communicate a terrifying degree of urgency. Like if you don't do what he says right now, people could die. It can jump to a sharp holler when the things get even worse. His voice can be tender, it can be funny and biting. On the phone, he just sounded like a guy on a Sunday afternoon. The background shuffling quieted. "I'm learning a bunch of lines for tomorrow," he said, exhaling. He was in Atlanta filming Captain America: New World Order, the fourth film in that franchise, in which he will play the President of the United States for the second time in his career. I apologized for needing this additional time on the phone after he had been so generous in Los Angeles. Breakfast, airplane hangar, driving around in his Tesla, the drinks at his home. But he said, "Don't be silly." This would be our final interaction before I had to write this story, so under pressure I had to ask all lingering questions while approximating the kind of breezy conversation that tends to yield good article fodder. He knew all of this because we had talked about what exactly I was trying to accomplish and what exactly he was trying to accomplish with this article. "Is it fun making a Marvel movie?" I asked, this being his first. He said, "Yeah, I mean, there are tough days and easy days and fun days and all kind of days. It's a tough schedule and yeah, it's fun, but it's not a walk in the park. It's not fun. It's work." This was work too, taking my call on a Sunday afternoon, which I knew because he had also talked about that. Almost every profile I had read of Harrison Ford had been pretty much a story about what it's like to write a profile of Harrison Ford, and how he's grouchy, difficult, impatient, or unwilling to talk about himself, and whether the writer can get him to talk about himself, can get him to finally, in this story, reveal the real Harrison Ford. He let me know early on that he doesn't think that's the point of these stories at all. The interviewer asking cleverly worded questions designed to lull the actor into revealing his demons and secrets and things he's never told anyone, and the actor just trying to promote the movie. As we talk on the phone on a Sunday afternoon, I think about the first morning we met for breakfast. I told him that with every assignment, I always try to write the greatest magazine profile ever written, silly and true. And he said, "Well, that's fine, but you've got to have material to work with. He stopped cutting his chicken sausage for a second and pointed his knife and fork right at me, his eyebrows up. I've got to participate. He called my cell as I was pulling out of LAX in my rental car. Our first interaction. Hi, it's Harrison Ford, he said. He was wanting to know what I might wish to do the next morning when we would meet. This was unusual. The celebrity profile subject calling to make the arrangements. He said he had some errands to do, but that we could meet after. I said that might actually be kind of funny and interesting. Harrison Ford doing errands. Well, what I mean is I'm getting my hair cut, he said. The guy is coming here to the house to cut my hair for this Marvel movie. You want to come and see me get my hair cut? Yeah, that would be great. As I said it, too excitedly, I realized how weird it sounded. I just mean, okay, he said, giving me the address and the instructions for the gate. See you tomorrow. About 4 hours later, he called me back. The haircut guy wasn't coming after all, so why don't we just meet for breakfast at 9? Sorry about all this, he said. He arrives at the fancy market driven place in Brentwood 1 minute early and quickly gets to the business of finding a good table. There's a skylight, and a square of sunlight frames him as he stands in the middle of the restaurant, pointing this way and that with the hostess smiling a thanks when they settle on a two-top near the kitchen. He tells me he just ran into Bob Iger, the CEO of Disney, the company that will release Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny on June 30th. It's that kind of joint, barely beyond pleasantries. Ford is now talking about airplanes. He's been flying for 28 years. I will not be buried under a stone that says actor, he says. For me, flying is as important a part of my life as my business. It's not like playing golf. He gets to talking about an organization called Young Eagles, which holds events at local airports on Saturday afternoons, where pilots take kids for half-hour flights to pick their interest. Ford was president of the group for 5 years and took up dozens of kids himself. Here's the thing, he says. When we take a kid up, we're actually investing his voting mother and father in general aviation, which is different from commercial aviation. People don't understand both the value and the contribution to the economy and the community that general aviation provides. General aviation. That's the farmer who's flying his produce to a farmer's market. That's the mechanic with his tools who's flying out to fix another airplane. That's the doctor in Montana who's flying himself from clinic to clinic. It's me when I go to fucking Haiti to drop off supplies and doctors when there's an earthquake. It's a whole community of people who contribute to the economy who are getting squeezed out because the government would rather concentrate on commercial aviation. And we have been beset by losing airports for the economic opportunity that they present in another form. He starts grabbing silverware and arranging it on the table. So look, here's Santa Monica Airport. Here's the runway, bangs fork down. Here's the beach, knife perpendicular, a few inches away. And between the airport and the beach, slaps napkin down, indicating the city. The height of the buildings is limited by the FAA because of plane traffic taking off. So they took 1,500 feet of a 5,000-foot runway to squeeze people out, airplanes, so they could build higher buildings over here. Thanks the napkin. Of course, then they do a survey among Santa Monica voters. What are the 10 things that most need to be done? Number 10 on their list is to get rid of the airport, but number 1 on their list is traffic congestion. Lowers chin, raises eyebrows, points at me. I rest my case. So that's why Young Eagles is about the parents too, I say. Fucking A, he says a little too loud, drumming his fingers on the table, which he does sometimes when he gets going on a topic. He smiles. Hey, if you don't mind, leave the fucking A out. My wife is still giving me shit about that Hollywood Reporter thing, and I'm trying not to say that too much. Earlier this year, that magazine printed an interview with him, which he will bring up several times during our conversations. Me and the writer were sitting on a folding chairs in a horse stall. It didn't feel like a formal enough atmosphere to have to clean up my language, he says. And they printed every single fuck. In a career full of moments, Ford is having yet another. That reporter interview was to promote Shrinking, the Apple TV comedy, on which he co-stars as a psychiatrist. It could just as well have been for 1923, the Paramount Plus Western that is part of Taylor Sheridan's Yellowstone TV colossus. I tell him I rewatched the previous 4 Indiana Jones with my son last week. He points a bony, roughened finger at me. Advantage you, he says. Do you watch your movies? Fuck yeah, until I can't do anything about it. So you watch it only while it's getting made. Yeah, when it's done, it's done. I'm making something else. Fucker's on his own, he grimaces at his persistent profanity. This is why I get in trouble, he says. Okay, but can I put that one in? He shrugs and then nods, seeing the narrative value of that particular fuck. Yeah, that one works. He laughs. Ford is very funny, in movies and in conversations. Karen Allen, his co-star in Raiders of the Lost Ark, calls it that wonderful dry humor that comes at you sideways. The waiter comes to take our order. You get to pick how you want your eggs with the farmer's breakfast. And Ford says, poached, please, and runny. And here he turns his gaze from the menu up to the waiter, looks deep into his eyes with a sudden ferocity, curls his lips around his teeth, and says, and when I say runny, I mean run-ny, as if he's in the fugitive saying, I didn't kill my wife. The waiter does a small bow, manages a smile, and whispers, okay. Most people know a good deal about Harrison Ford. His path to becoming an actor was methodical and uneventful, going out for parts, landing small roles. He figured he could be a character actor. Anyone but the leading man, is how he describes it. A working actor, getting paid and going home at night. Then there's the famous thing that happened, a story of which there are many versions, but this is the right one. Ford had got a small part in the second feature film by a young director named George Lucas, 1973's American Graffiti. But he had a young family and wasn't making enough to live on, so he worked as a carpenter. A friend who had designed the millwork for the entrance to Francis Ford Coppola's offices couldn't find a carpenter to install it. He appealed to me, Ford says. I said I would do it, but only at night, when no one was around, because I didn't want to be that guy. I wanted them to think of me as an actor, which I was. I did the job. While I'm finishing up, first thing in the morning, in walked George Lucas and Richard Dreyfuss to begin the process of meeting people for Star Wars. George had told our agents he wanted new faces, not the same people from American Graffiti. I was there with my tool belt on, sweeping up, said hello, chatted, and that was it. Later, I was asked by the producer to help them read lines with candidates for all the parts. Don't know whether I read with people who were reading for Han Solo, can't remember. I read with quite a few princesses, but there was no indication or forewarning that I might be considered for this part. It was just a favor, and then of course they offered me the part. Han Solo was Ford's first role of significance, and yet even then, according to his similarly amateur co-star Mark Hamill, Ford had already had a world-weary way about him. I was wide-eyed and inexperienced, and Harrison arrives, and I'm telling you, from day one, just like Luke did, I looked up to him as someone who had a firmer grasp of all the elements than I did, Hamill says. I thought this guy's like Steve McQueen, Gary Cooper, John Wayne. He was instantly iconic, and yet the world at large didn't know who he was. I just thought this guy's major. Star Wars led to all kind of things, including Indiana Jones, a character Lucas developed for a movie that would be directed by his friend Steven Spielberg, 1981's Raiders of the Lost Ark. This is skipping a lot, but that's the general timeline. For a few overlapping years in the 1980s, Ford's likeness was on not one but two lunchboxes, one of the surest measures of superstardom in that decade. Non-lunchbox landmarks included Blade Runner, Witness, The Mosquito Coast, and Working Girl. The 90s brought Presumed Innocent, Patriot Games, The Fugitive, Clear and Present Danger, and Air Force One. You know all of this. What you don't know is what happens when they mess up Harrison Ford's eggs. The plates come. Two farmers' breakfasts. Mine's good. Over easy. As Ford cuts into his first poached egg, I'm asking, so would you say the character of Indiana Jones has some of your own boyhood? He lays down his fork and knife. His shoulders drop in defeat. The egg white is rubbery, the yolk chalky. He, chalky. He looks up at me. You couldn't have been clearer, I say. The waiter, seeing a problem, scurries over, eager and recoiling at the same time. Ford just looks up at the poor guy, not with anger, but with something worse, disappointment. It's not a mean look, it's a look that says, we can do better, friend. The waiter is smiling and trying to speak, and he looks as if he might cry. Are they not soft? He slinks away. Ford tries to refocus. A waitress returns with two beautiful, jiggling, poached eggs on a plate. Sorry to be so awkward, he says, smiling at her. Thanks. And now that he has two runny poached eggs, he clicks back on and looks up at me like, okay, what now? I guess the point, these stories we see, movies, novels, we look for ourselves in these characters and these stories, I say, rebooting. He nods. We look for ourselves and we look for useful information to help us navigate our fucking lives in the world that we're living in, he says. We don't realize what we're looking for that, but we're looking to pull out of a fantasy something that's useful to us. And what's useful to us is to emotionally participate in things outside of our own lives. Why make another Indiana Jones movie, filmed when he was pushing 80? I wanted an ambitious movie to be the last one, he says. And I don't mean that we didn't make ambitious movies before. They were ambitious in many different ways, but not necessarily as ambitious with a character as I wanted the last one to be. Early in The Dial of Destiny, there's a scene in which Jones is riding a horse on a subway platform in Manhattan. As Ford finished the scene, he felt hands all over his legs, and he says, I thought, what the fuck? Like I was being attacked by gropers. I looked down and there's three stunt guys there making sure I didn't fall off the stirrup. They said, oh, we were just afraid because we thought, and blah 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 blah. And I said, leave me the fuck alone. I'm an old man. He's raising his voice now. Sorry. He lowers his voice, but his fingers are drumming like mad. Leave me alone. I'm an old man getting off a horse and loud voice again. He can't help it. I want it to look like that. There's another moment in the Dial of Destiny. Indiana Jones is in hand-to-hand combat with the villain on a speeding train, and he holds his famous hat over the villain's face before punching him, as if to take him by surprise. It's a brilliant bit of Jonesian theatrics, and it was Ford's idea, the kind of thing only he would think of, having inhabited Jones for so long. Over a 50-year career and eight-decade life, Ford had banged himself up from time to time. Snowboards, horses, stunts. Something must have weakened his shoulder, because when he held his hat in the face of actor Mads Mikkelsen and pulled his hand back to demonstrate the punch, someone was in the way and he had to adjust mid-strike. Ford pulled the subscapularis muscle of his right shoulder. Production shut down for 2 weeks, and Ford had to sit out an extra 6 weeks after that. Well, I offer, you've always been known for doing so many of your own action scenes. Yeah, well, I'm also known for shutting movies down because I get hurt, which is not something you want to be known for. But hey, shit happens. He inhales, exhales, drums the table, and raises his eyebrows. Okay, next. We are sitting in his airplane hangar. That is a sentence his wife, Callista Flockhart, would rather not see in this story, he tells me, because it just makes him look like a rich guy with planes, which he is. He left Santa Monica because he was pissed about the shortened runway, and he built a hangar of his own at another airport. There's a nice living room and office, with a kitchen, and wood paneling and sofas. Yes, in the 28 years he's been flying, there was a crash, the result of mechanical failure. The week before we met, he had completed his annual recurrent training, required of all pilots with a certain rating. Flying is the tension between freedom and responsibility, he says. The obligation on every flight to ensure the safety of the people aboard. It's serious, and I continually have to meet the standards. He pauses, then smiles and holds a finger up. And it's the third dimension. We're living the two-dimensional life here on the ground. Loud table drumming. When you get up there and you see the third dimension, that's what's so exciting about these kids, the young eagles. You fly them over their house, and it's the first time they really know where they live. It's interesting to hear Ford talk about kids, because while he has 5 children of his own, in movies he has rarely taken on the role of a family man. Even if one of his characters has kids, they're not usually integral to the story. The Fugitive, Blade Runner, Witness, Working Girl, the Tom Clancy movies, Air Force One, The Devil's Own. Not a lot of parenting going on. The Mosquito Coast, very unusual parenting. Star Wars, kid kills him. In Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, Jones is something of a father figure to Short Round, played by Ke Kwan, who was 12 but looked about 8. Every time the camera was just on me, Harrison would be right next to the camera, feeding me the lines and helping Steven Spielberg get that performance out of me, Kwan says. He was like a mouse, Ford says, laughing at the mention of Kwan. Such a baby, a lovely kid. Paul, his character on Shrinking, is a divorced man living in California with a grown daughter in Connecticut. She tries to reconnect with him, in part because she has a child whom Paul barely knows. For most of her life, she says, his work came first. Even now, he won't move east to be closer to her. He's sitting at the table in the hangar office, facing giant windows that look out on the runway. I ask him whether, in that fraught relationship on Shrinking, there's anything he's drawing on from his own life. Yes and no. It is a bit of a shock to discover that there are things that a writer can bring to a script that you recognize as a shadow of your own experience. You don't necessarily actively draw on some specific thing that happened to you, but it's in the bank, and you want to spend it. His voice intensifies, and he's drumming now. I mean, you don't want to take your kid's life and make that the currency, so you try and separate that. But I've got the daughter in shrinking whose mother said I had spent all my time working. And then when the daughter says she's going to split for the East Coast, my character says, well, I've got responsibilities here. I have a life. And I don't go with her. That's the shit that happens. And somewhere there's a reference in my life, and I think, are they stealing fucking my life here? But you discover that you've had these experiences, but someone else has too. There's no point, he says, in going any deeper than that. No point in talking about some specific experience he might have had. It's no advantage to having people involved in your everyday life and the nuts and bolts of who you are, because I've never played Harrison Ford in a movie. Jessica Williams, his co-star in on Shrinking, can find herself staring at Ford. Sometimes watching him do a take is like watching a sun raise, she says. It's like watching Indiana Jones and Han Solo and everything all at once. And you watch it come together and it's like, holy shit, he's that dude. He's him. Ford didn't grow up watching and loving movies, but he loves the process of making them. John Williams, the legendary composer of the Star Wars and Indiana Jones themes, tells me that Ford will often come sit on an auditorium stage while the orchestra is recording the score, just to listen, an unusual thing for an actor to do. A genuine joy, Williams calls Ford. I ask Ford whether he has become a film aficionado over time, a movie lover. He pauses, a long pause, takes a few deep breaths. In a word, no, he says, then smiles. It's not about the movies, it's about my personal experience. I'm fascinated by how much talent there is out there in all aspects of this business, but I just can't keep up with the amount of product. I find myself not sitting down to watch a movie every night. We love when we do it, but we do it as a family. So we're as likely to be watching Poirot the detective as we are to be watching everything everywhere all at once. I've got big holes in the fabric, and I don't consider that to be a positive. I should be watching more, just out of the respect for what the business has given me. I love being transported by a movie. A great story, drums. But I do other stuff. I do the dishes instead of watching the movie. You do the dishes? Who the hell is gonna do it? I got to live. He's slicing slabs of Emmentaler with a silver sheath knife, and he grabs some wheat crackers from a box on the island. He's wearing dark jeans, a blue sweater, and slippers. The jeans are crisp but not new, and his shoulders, still broad, stretch the sweater snug. He leads me to the bar in the family room. I ask him, dumbly, if he's handy around the house. He looks at me. I'm a fucking Finnish carpenter, he says. When he bought the house, he says, the doors were cheap, hollow doors, and the cabinetry faces were not solid wood, so he assembled and oversaw a crew to fix all that, schooling them on how he wanted everything done. He pours the bourbon. He sits. The man has some stories. There was the time he lived on a boat offshore in Belize for the entire 4 month shoot of the Mosquito Coast around 1985. The hotel in Belize City was super funky and had a very active bar, but no room service. And the bar was nothing but drug dealers and DEA guys, he says. So I had this idea that maybe I could live on a boat. A friend of mine helped me find a boat that he'd worked on as a kid, and I lived about a quarter mile offshore. I went to work each day in a Boston whaler, gave some guy $5 to make sure it was still there at the end of the day, and then Double Man would drive me to work. Double Man? Yeah, we used to call him Double Man. I thought it was because he was twice as big as anybody you've ever fucking seen, but the real reason was that he was working with the DAA, but was also available to negotiate product deliveries in other areas, you know? It was kind of a weird world. But anyway, fishermen would bring me lobsters and fish from the day, and I'd come back to the boat and sit out there and watch the moonlight. It was a hoot. It was just me and the cook, and I had two deckhands, both named Bubba. They both came out of Biloxi. My friend who told me about the boat, it was Jimmy Buffett. But Jimmy Buffet, he had crewed on it as a kid out of Biloxi. Drums, his fingers, ba-dum, ba-dum, sips bourbon. Story over. Then there was that time he went to see the Dalai Lama. His second wife, Melissa Mathison, had written the screenplay for Kundun, the Martin Scorsese movie, and they were invited to India. Long story. Couldn't find the airport. Guys with guns. Strange hotel. Ba-dum, bourbon. A Brad Pitt story. Ford has said vaguely in previous interviews that The Devil's Own was a difficult movie to make. I ask him if he remembers why. Yeah, I remember why, he says, taking a sip, staring down. Brad developed the script, then they offered me the part. I saved my comments about the character and the construction of the thing. I admired Brad, drumming. First of all, I admire Brad. I think he's a wonderful actor. Thump. He's a really decent guy, but we couldn't agree on a director until we came to Alan Pakula, who I had worked with before, but Brad had not. Brad had this complicated character, and I wanted a complication on my side, so that it wasn't just a good and evil battle. And that's when I came up with the bad shooting thing. Ford's character, a cop, witnesses an illegal shooting by his partner and must decide whether to report it. I worked with a writer, but then all of a sudden we're shooting and we didn't have a script that Brad and I agreed on. Each of us had different ideas about it. I understand why he wanted to stay with his point of view, and I wanted to stay with my point of view. Or I was imposing my point of view, and it's fair to say that's what Brad felt. It was complicated. I liked the movie very much. Very much. All these stories, I ask him if he's ever thought about writing his autobiography. So, he swirls the ice in his glass, pours another splash of bourbon for both of us, and tells me that he was once going to, but then didn't. This was just a few years ago. Later, he ran into Elton John at Stella McCarthy's 50th birthday party. And John, who famously wrote an autobiography on his own, me, asked Ford why he hadn't gotten round to it. I said, I thought about it, but I decided I'm not going to do it because I didn't want to tell the truth, Ford says. And I saw the disappointment on his face. Elton's pretty genuine guy, you know. I wanted to mollify him. So I said, but I didn't want to lie either. So that's the reason I'm not writing a book. Because I don't want to tell the truth, and I don't want to lie. The cheese is gone, the bourbon is going down smoothly, and it's to the point where we're pressing our fingers onto cracker crumbs on the plate. Ford asks if I have dinner plans. No, I say. Okay, let's finish this shit up and then let's go out and have dinner. That sounds great, I say. Great. So where do we have a hole in this story? A hole in this story. It's a thoughtful question and demonstrates a mastery not only of doing interviews, but also, there's no other way to say it, of managing his world. Harrison Ford knows how to get through this life with his self intact. And it's not just because he's 80. He had it 46 years ago. We did publicity for the first Star Wars together. We traveled together, Mark Hamill says. Harrison was like the father figure. He would give us little report cards after an appearance. You know, Mark, you were a little glib there. Carrie, you're so sarcastic all the time. Carrie Fisher and I called him the publicity sheriff. But more than that, I can't tell you how many times in my life and career when I've asked myself, WWHD, HD, yeah. Holes in the story, for one thing. I've seen the movie by now, Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, and it's spectacular. Except perhaps early on, the first time we see old Indy. He doesn't look so good, and it made me a little sad, I tell him. Ford smiles. Not what you expected, right? But did you buy it? Absolutely. Yeah, that's why I wanted to do the movie. I wanted to know what happened to him and how he handled it. Director James Mangold and I worked closely together. on that scene especially. Waking up in my underwear with the empty glass in my hand was my idea. I wanted to see Indiana Jones at the nadir point and rebuild him from the ground up. The kind of collaboration doesn't always happen, he says. Now that he has reached legend status, directors listen to him. Everyone listens to him, really. Mangold tells me that every morning on set, as the day's filming began, Ford would rise out of his chair and say, "All right, let's shoot this piece of shit," and everyone would laugh. But back in the day, there was one director on a romantic war drama called Hanover Street in 1979 who wouldn't let Ford cut his longest share, even though he was playing a World War II fighter pilot. "I call us actors just a trick talking piece of meat," Ford says. "Stand there, say this, shut the fuck up, I'm the director." The guy who directed Force 10 from Navarone invited me to go to dinner the second night. I thought that was really nice, but the first thing he said was, "If you don't start doing something, I'm going to send you home." Looks up at an imaginary waiter. "I'll have the fish." I was trick talking piece of meat. I was a trick talking piece of meat. He drums on the bar. "What else?" He's hungry. I'm hungry. And I'm feeling a little bourbony. "I had a moment the other day at the hangar," I tell him. "I'm sitting there thinking, I'm here with Harrison Ford. He's being generous and open. Am I making the most of it? What am I not asking?" He slaps the bar. "Look, if I had cured cancer last week, we'd have fucking something to talk about, which is not to say that I don't." He stops, bunches his mouth almost into a smile, and motions his hand back and forth. Him and me, there together. He says more quietly, "I mean, I actually love this. I hate it and I love it. Because I get the chance to meet people who do what you do. I have total respect for the process. I just don't have that much respect for me when I'm doing it. Because I'm editor in charge of my life. And there are things that are just dumb for me to talk about that are going to make it less interesting to go see my new movie. Our new movie, Jim's new movie, Phoebe Waller Bridge's new movie, Matt's new movie, Disney's new movie. Well, it is called Indiana Jones. Yeah, but I'm not Indiana Jones. I'm Harrison Ford. Harry Ford, in fact. Is that what people call you? No, well, some people. I'll keep calling you Harrison. Yeah, well, you fucking better, he says. What kind of questions do Star Wars superfans ask you? Well, they usually ask me if there was a fight between Han Solo and Indiana Jones, who would fucking win? And I say, voice rising, fingers drumming, "Me, asshole! I don't want to fucking make shit up like that. I mean, what are you asking me that crap for?" He takes a long sip, tells me to take my time, make sure I have everything I need. I think back to what he said in the hangar the other day about his life experiences informing his acting and the fact that he so rarely has he played a dad. I take a drink and say, "I want to ask you not about your children specifically, but how becoming a parent changes a person. A smart friend of mine once told me something about being a parent, and I think about it a lot. I'd like to think I'd take a bullet from my wife, but there are two people I can tell you without a doubt I'd take a bullet for." He looks right at me, says, "Your children." Yeah, talk about learning about people and humanity. You learn how to be afraid. My son's chronic illness. I bring it to everything I write. Well, how can you not? And I think you can bring it without talking about it. You bring it in another form. You bring it chemically. I mean, the table rubbing, long pause, long breath. I can tell you this. If I'd been less successful, I'd probably be a better parent. He stares at me for a long time. He has given me material. He knows this. It's what he's been trying to do all along. Once again, he mentions that Hollywood Reporter interview, which got all kinds of attention because in it he said, "I know who the fuck I am," which became a sensational headline. When he speaks again, his voice is not raised, and there is no dramatic tremble, no bite. His voice is peaceful. He says, I think that's tantamount to the to I know who the fuck I am. He nods, which I still get shit about from my wife, like I don't take mental health seriously. I do take mental health seriously. I was trying to say, as I explained to her, it's that I accommodate all of the flaws that people go to psychiatrists to accommodate because I accept my flaws. Drum drum. I accept my flaws and my failures. I don't accept them, I own them. And certainly, the more constant gardener is the better parent. And I've been out of town, up my own ass for most of my life. We sit at his bar for another few minutes. Everything is still, and he is not rushed. His eyes search the corners of the room, the way I've seen them do 1,000 times, going back to when I was 6 years old. Hungry? He asks. He glances at the red light on my digital recorder. The cost of dinner is to shut that fucking. And that was the end of it. And I just wanted to praise Ryan D'Agostino for a really, really great interview. And yeah, um, and there's a comment down here also praising this interview. It is actually one of the best interviews I read. And Ryan, you should have all the credit. And to all the other people for the story, for the photos, for the styling, for the production, for the set design, for the grooming, for the creative direction, design direction, visual direction, executive director, uh, and uh, and the entertainment executive producer and the video. Yeah, everything. All of these people made this great article. Real pleasure to read. So yeah, go in and read it, all of you. Ciao.